Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is November 15th, 2016. We're here in Murray, Utah, right outside of Salt Lake City. And I'm super interested to have today's interview. Today we are interviewing Lance Allred. Lance, welcome to Mormon Stories.
Thanks for having me, John. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
All right. So Lance is cool for a number of reasons. Lance has published a book. It's called Long Shot, Lance Allred, The Adventures of a Deaf Fundamentalist Mormon Kid and His Journey to the NBA. And that really does summarize a lot of reasons why Lance is cool. You will, for those of you who follow Mormon Stories, you'll know that we interviewed Lance's father, Vance Allred, just in our last episode. We did a good 3 or 4 hours, I think, with Vance. Vance was super cool because his father, Lance's grandfather, was Rulon Allred, who started the Allred group, the fundamentalist Mormon polygamy group, also known as the Apostolic United Brethren. But we just did a fantastic several hours on what it was like to grow up as the son of Rulon Allred. Rulon got assassinated, what happened to the Allred group with some sort of sexual abuse scandals, what led to Vance leaving his fundamentalist group and joining the mainstream Mormon church, and then what led him out. If you haven't listened to our interview with Vance, you really should go back and listen to it first because it provides a lot of fascinating context for my interview with Lance. Now, Lance, in addition to, if you were ever a University of Utah basketball fan or a Weber State basketball fan, or if you followed the NBA at all, you'll know that that Lance played college and NBA level basketball, professional basketball for, I think, 10 years. Is that right? 10 years?
Yeah.
10 years. So we're going to be talking about a lot of cool stuff today. We're going to be talking about growing up the grandson of a fundamentalist Mormon polygamist prophet. We're going to talk about Lance and his dad joining the mainstream Mormon church and sort of his high school years here in Utah. We're going to talk about his career in college basketball. We're going to talk about him losing his LDS faith. We're going to talk about what it was like to play in the NBA. I think you even played with LeBron James. Is that right?
I did. I played with LeBron.
So you were on the Cleveland Cavaliers for how long?
I was with him for about 10 months.
10 months?
Yeah.
So pretty much a year, right?
Yeah.
Other NBA teams as well?
The Pacers for a while, and then every continent in the world except for Antarctica.
A lot of European stuff.
Yeah, and that's a grind. Most people don't realize it, but it's not fun.
Oh, I'm sure it's awful. So we'll talk about that, but also if any of you followed the Salt Lake City TEDx, you will know that Lance gave a really great talk called something like "What is Your Polygamy?" Right?
What is your polygamy?
Is that right?
Yeah,
Really good talk, talking about blind spots and how we all have them.
True.
Even progressive and post-Mormons have blind spots.
Absolutely.
Isn't that weird?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll be talking about sort of that epic journey.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun. It's funny. It's always fun to have someone else narrate your life for you like that, give a summary. I'm like, wow, that's actually it's kind of, when I say it to myself in my head, it's all normal, but when someone else is saying it back to me, I'm like, yeah, that is kind of an interesting, weird life, isn't it? So, hey, let's do it. Let's have fun.
I think it's a fascinating life. So we're really excited to have you on Mormon Stories.
It'll be fun. I'm excited for this. I mean, because as a credit to you, I've had a lot of people with podcasts and radio interviews that want to interview me that have a very biased agenda when it comes to doing their podcast, to basically, be all negative or all offensive. And I've noticed you and I've watched you. A lot of people that I trust have always highly recommended you. So this is a great opportunity. So I'm thankful again for it. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right. So let's go ahead and begin. And if it's all right, tell us a little bit about your life and what you remember about growing up as the grandson of a fundamentalist polygamous prophet.
Yeah.
and the son of the Bruce R. McConkie.
Yeah, the Bruce R. McConkie.
Of fundamentalist
that would be my dad.
Mormonism, yeah.
The reason why I'm legally deaf, 80% hearing loss, was called the RH factor. And this is actually pretty common in polygamous communes in that the mother's a negative, the father's a positive blood type. And nowadays at medical hospitals, they just inject the mother with something without even really asking questions, right? It's just kind of status quo. But when you're born in a polygamous commune in your grandmother's bedroom, they don't think about those kind of things. And my grandfather, Rulon, who was a naturopath but also delivered all the babies, told my parents not to even worry about the RH factor because Jesus is coming again. And he was supposed to come in 1976 or 77, but he never came.
Wait, who had said that he was coming?
Rulon.
Rulon said that?
My grandfather said
And
that.
Rulon was assassinated when?
77.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 years before I was born. So I never knew Rulon.
Okay.
But I was raised in his, utopian dream of Pinesdale, Montana. And that is why, again, the hearing loss, what's happening is my mother's white blood cells were recognizing me as a positive blood type as a parasite. And so her body was killing me off. And when I was born, I was almost dead. Pretty much lethargic, jaundiced, very inactive. And, the polygamous commune of Pinesdale, Montana, they did all the prayer circles and all the fasting for my health. And eventually my mom said, you know what, enough is enough. Let's get Lance to the hospital in Hamilton, Montana. And just outside of Missoula. It's about 40 minutes south of Missoula, Montana. And there was a Johns Hopkins educated resident who specialized in RH at that hospital because he was an RH baby himself. So it was dumb luck.
What are the freaking chances of that?
Exactly. So he quickly took me, measured my blood count, and something called a bilirubin liver titer count. He came and told my parents, okay, at a 25, most babies have severe brain damage. At a 35 titer count, babies are dead. Your son's a 45. He's off the charts. I don't know why he's alive right now. And so he quickly rushed blood down from Missoula, Montana, and we started going through blood changes, not just transfusion, but changes, flushing out all of my bad blood that had my mom's white blood cells. And so he released me. I was in an incubator for about 2 weeks. I think 18 days, actually. But he released me, and he kind of chuckled, and he told my parents, I would publish this in the Journal of American Medicine, but no one would believe me. And there's no logical, scientific, rational reason as to why I'm alive other than simply I chose to be. I fought. And I had someone help me. And that's the thing about life. I've had a lot of peaks and valleys and ups and downs, but I've been able to be successful because I always get back up. I choose to keep fighting, but there's always someone there that has helped me. And this doctor was the first one to do that for me. And the reason why I speak and I don't do sign, when you're born and raised in a polygamous commune, there's no amenities to learn sign language. So you just have to learn to be thrown in the fire. And I was in speech therapy till I was 15, learning to talk this way. And, most people that talk like us, like that's how I would talk. But we talk like that in the back of the throat because you feel that reverberation, that vibration in your skull. So you feel like you're actually making a sound. And it's kind of a catch-20, not a catch-22. It's just one of the things that's hard about being deaf or legally deaf is that you can either talk like a deaf person and everyone thinks you're an idiot, or you work really hard to sound this way and you don't always respond because you don't ever always hear anything, especially when people are talking to your back and they call you an asshole. And that either you're dumb or you're an asshole. And so, but that's my life, and that I've always kind of been on the fringes, the outliers, and I've always, as a kid, I always wanted to be normal, quote unquote. So I kept working that much harder to be normal, but that hard work always pays out, that eventually you keep always falling on the outliers there. And so growing up in Montana, there's a lot of wonderful memories actually growing up in Pinesdale, Montana.
Real quick, so you're, just for those who didn't listen to the episode with Vance, your grandfather Rulon was sort of started out in an LA area in California.
Yes.
He moved to Salt Lake City, left his wife, moved to Salt Lake City, and sort of got connected with
The Short Creek, actually. the Short Creek people. He started out in Short Creek with the Barlows. But then he eventually, and the Jeffs, he started.
So he was down there.
He was down there, but he started to notice some things he was not comfortable with at all. Delivering babies, 13, 14-year-old girls. You're like, yeah, no, I can't do this.
So they were sleeping with sort of underage girls.
Yeah, absolutely. They were
at that point.
They were marrying all these young women. And, you know, I do say this about Rulon. From everything, the journals and the diaries I've read, it's easy to cast these people in black and white spotlights. But I can say this about Rulon. In the context of polygamous leaders, he never introduced new doctrine. He always believed in adhering strictly to Joseph Smith doctrine. So he never said, oh, I have revelation from God, and this is now what we need to do. And so in that context, I can say confidently that, in my opinion, I believe Rulon was the most ethical of polygamous leaders. It's not saying a lot, but I still do believe that as far as integrity, and obviously I do know that he, and all of us we have the ability to tell a story so many times that you begin to believe it's true. And that you buy your own propaganda.
Real quick, why is it ethical for a prophet to not reveal new revelation?
Well, the thing is, what he's doing is saying, you know what? He's kind of hamstringing himself, saying, you know what? I am just holding down the fort as a disciple of Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ. And that I believe Joseph Smith was the prophet for the latter days. And I'm just trying to hold that vision, and then God will come again and we can sustain that. Rather than simply trying to use that platform saying, oh, the keys have been handed down for me, and the 13th article of faith now allows me to have further revelation. And you see so many prophets like the Jeffs, or even now in the mainstream church, that people use that 13th article of faith as a get-out-jail-free card. Kind of like, oh, well, we didn't allow blacks to have the priesthood, but now the new revelation allows for it to happen. If you and I had that 13th article of faith in a marriage, and we could say, oh, I'm sorry I hit you yesterday, honey. God told me to. But today he told me to apologize and say that was a bad thing to do. That would be labeled as a schizophrenic, emotionally abusive relationship. But when it comes to religion, somehow we accept that. And so Rulon never really played that card. It was just, I am trying to hold down the fort. I believe strongly my testimony is this. And I know sometimes, like, he would passively tell my father, yeah, that he had seen God. I've heard enough of my dad tell his experiences. And so I can't say Rulon was a saint by any means, but I understand why he would do the things as what he did. And it's a tale of great hubris, actually, in that I know Rulon probably didn't get a lot of attention from his father. And then finally someone like Joseph Musser comes around, tells him that not only is he special, but he's also God's next chosen prophet. And Rulon was very charismatic, and he got to have someone tell him that he was a good person. And I do believe, again, in the context, that he thought he was doing good. He really thought he was trying to fulfill Joseph Smith's prophecy for the latter days. But eventually, when you have that much power and that many people around you always yes-manning you, telling you how awesome you are, it's pretty hard not to start drinking your own Kool-Aid. And so I think eventually it just got away from him. He was happy just to accept anybody into the Allred group, because that meant more money would come in. He could build more buildings and grow a larger following. And that, I think he just got pretty lazy as far as who he vetted and who he allowed into his space. And that's when you see all of the very questionable people come in, that really, the monsters, I guess you could say. And so it just got away from him. So it's a classic Greek tale of hubris and pride, I would say. And so that's kind of my summary of Rulon.
And so, as I remember the story, Rulon eventually moves to Salt Lake. There's some Time magazine article.
Yeah, Life article.
Life article,
yeah,
where he's on the cover, along with like a bunch of wives / random women / children. And that makes him kind of a bit of a celebrity.
He became the poster child for 20th century American polygamy.
Yeah.
For sure. Again, he was charismatic, he was charming, and you have to be in order to be able to get 7,000 people to give you all their money and 7 women to marry you. So obviously he had game, more game than I'll ever have. And then he starts the Montana community because to escape religious persecution. After he was arrested in the 40s, he took an oath he would never practice polygamy, but then it happened again. The police came after him. As you know, my dad went to Pocatello. The wives split up. Rulon established another colony up in Montana where there were no anti-polygamy laws. So just on the Idaho-Montana border, you know, on the side of Montana looks like a man's face. Pinedale is right in the nose of the Montana border, the man's profile. And it was pretty much right there, backed up against the Bob Marshall wilderness, where there was nobody behind us. So if we ever needed to retreat into the canyons that went hundreds of miles deep, we could. It was like the escape contingency plan. And so that, and all that, Rulon, he was assassinated in 1977, 4 years before I was born. And when I grew up, my experience at Pinedale is that, obviously, from what I've heard from my siblings and my parents and my aunts and uncles, that the 70s fervor was really intense, how they just really did the law of consecration, and they were living it gung-ho. 1980s was still pretty intense in that you still have so much of that residual afterflow that the community was really there. It was palpable in that the memories that I have were, there's a dichotomy that it was wonderful growing up knowing that everyone knew my name in this town. And everyone knew my name, so I was the deaf kid with the big giant hearing aids, and I talked funny, but I was also Van Santana's kid. And we were Allreds. And this is some of the ironies that I started to notice in a socialist commune, in that, wait, we're all God's chosen people. He loves us equally, yet Allreds and Jessups are superior, and Davises and Widos, kind of bottom tier. So,
real quick, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I feel a lot of the Zion kind of impulses that I think Joseph felt, in the sense that I'm very social, I love people, and I have all these friends where if I would want to buy this huge plot of land.
That's fun, isn't
and
it?
have all of us build houses and live together in a community. It's
a wonderful idea.
I think I understand the commune impulse. So before you talk about how that started unraveling for you, talk about if there were any genuine ways where it was actually wonderful or idyllic.
Absolutely. That's the thing I'll miss the most. I'll always miss the most, was the sense of community and family, not just my nuclear family, because I grew up in a monogamous home. I was the youngest of Vance's kids. His second wife had left shortly after I was born. I had no memory of her. And she took her 3 kids, so I grew up in a nuclear monogamous home. But all my cousins had 3 or 4 moms. But my grandmother lived right through the woods. My cousins were right through the gully. But all 400 of my first cousins and I were there. I mean, we were just running around like Smurfs in the wilderness there. And I could walk outside any time of day into the forest there, or to the school playground, or to the baseball field, and there would be cousins and kids playing. And sometimes it'd be pine cone fights, sometimes it'd be baseball games, sometimes it'd be hide and seek, or all that stuff that you would do in the forest. Beautiful, beautiful memories, and I loved it, and I will always miss that. And
So did people share their money?
Yes.
And what was done with the money?
People shared their money. Sometimes it was ordered kind of like, how the government does when divorced couples, they kind of have to pay their child support to the government, then they filter it back to the other spouse. The Allred group would want to do that, give us our tithing, and we decide who gets the lion's share for whatever welfare needs this month. But I grew up in a home where my mother's mother, my grandmother, Yaya, and that it was always financially intertwined, and that we always helped each other. And that's something that's my parents still have, and I too do, in that I've clashed with brothers-in-laws or sisters who, it was funny because in our home, in this polygamous commune, when you married a sibling, you were joining families. And then the families would get together and have big picnics, right? And it just became this big cluster, adding on. And financial situations or bank accounts, that wasn't taboo. It was just kind of like, you need help here? Okay, fine, I'll float you this month. Okay, can you help me this month? So money was just another part of the equation and energy that was going around that we're all intertwined with it together. And so it was just a means to give and help our loved ones.
Did everyone work for the business?
No, the thing is, the reason why the Allred group was so successful, in the 70s, I know my dad, because they were getting ready for Jesus to come, that's why he built all those homes for the utopian cause without getting paid, right? But the reason why Rulon was so wealthy and why Orville the Baron wanted his money, and that's why he was a target of Orville the Baron, Rulon didn't believe in building up these big chain link fences and keeping everyone inside the compound. We didn't have compounds, we had communes. And so Rulon, who was a naturopath, who was a doctor in the outside world, would go and make good money, but he'd tell all of his followers, even the wives, go work, make money, bring it back. And so the Allred group, at its peak, was the largest and most financially wealthy polygamous group that I believe still today that the world has ever seen at Rulon's time.
I always thought it was second to the FLDS.
FLDS, the thing is, the problem with the FLDS is that they keep people inside that compound. So that money just recycles. They're not really bringing anything new in, except for the few people that are allowed to go out and work. The Allred group, everyone's going out, working, bringing money back in. And that's why Rulon was such a target and why he was also the biggest threat to the LDS church. Because the FLDS has always been kind of, really exclusive. But Rulon, he sent his scouts out there into the wards and find out who was asking questions, who was disenchanted. And then with his charm and his, he was just so inclusive that he was really, again, he could draw people in. And so I don't have the pamphlets, but there's a couple. I have a funny Ensign pamphlet, and it was issued in like 1960-something, where the Ensign magazine is actually calling Rulon to repentance.
Wow.
On the front cover.
What?
Yeah, I need to find this for you.
Oh, I don't believe that.
I love that.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how much of a threat he was.
What was this idea of no poor among them? Were there poor?
Absolutely. Again, those are the ironies that you see.
Okay.
When you're an Allred, you're not going to go hungry. You're Rulon's posterity. When you're a Jessup, you're not going to go hungry because they're the boss. They're the guys that have all the purse strings and they have their businesses, but it's also backed by the AUB, so they can't go bankrupt. So you saw the Jessups do this a lot, like their construction companies would be going under, and then they would just tell Owen Allred, my grandfather here, hey, we need money. Okay, Owen will go grab a shoebox full of $1 million and give it to him. That's why the Allred group was busted for money laundering after we left in like 2002. And that the Allred group would just keep shoeboxes full of millions of dollars of cash, just ready to spend on hand. But the Jessups had access to that money. And so they were kind of like the beard, the face of the money laundering. And so the Allreds and Jessups definitely had it nice. And the Jessups, instead of, why are these prophets and their sons, the Jessups, instead of building homes for free, why are they getting all the nice homes? And then why are they flying around in the toy planes all the time? And yet we're here, my dad's building homes for free and all that. And so the socialism is a beautiful idea that no one should ever want or go hungry or be poor. But I learned at a young age from this experience that socialism will never work because different people have different sets of work ethic and entitlement. And human nature will always spoil it. And so, but then again, I had friends, neighbors like the Wyricks or other people that were or the Reynolds or the Wissenbachs who were very poor, and Alsops and Davises, and they were treated as less than, as an inferior. But this is why my parents were so popular and why they were a big threat and why we actually ended up leaving Montana. because my parents taught me what integrity is, that they treated everyone exactly the same. My mom, because she grew up outside of polygamy in mainstream Mormon church, but then her family joined the Allred group when she was 16, my mom's parents were just very kind and giving and generous people, and her dad, who did not come with her, her parents got divorced. My grandfather, Pacus, he died 2 years ago, but he was always just so kind to everybody. And my mom took that same upbringing, and it really rubbed off on my dad, and so much so that they became the champions of the poor people that you speak of. That they noticed that people were getting different treatment, and they had a real hard time with that. And that's why my dad became the champion of the disenchanted in the Allred group. And that's why there was a power struggle between my dad and the two main Jessup brothers, Marvin and Morris, up there in Montana. You read about that in my book. And my mom's youngest sister actually got pregnant out of wedlock. Now it happens all the time, right? But in 1980 Montana, oh, the horror, right? It may as well be a scarlet letter. And the Jessups then intervened and said, no, she does not belong to that family anymore. She belongs to the Stoker family, who she had the father of the upcoming baby, right? And so they tried to swoop in, the Jessups, as like the authority and say she no longer could really have any say with her family, my mom's family, as my mom's younger sister. And my dad said, whoa, what's that about? No, she's still a woman. She's a human being. She can do what she wants. And my father, in a very chauvinistic world, actually stood up for my mom and her sisters and his family. And that just really butted heads, and it got ugly. And so we actually ended up having to leave. And that was one of the saddest things because, John, again, my mom didn't have to work. My dad was a school teacher up in Missoula, Montana. He'd commute every day. But at that time, in the 80s, in Missoula, they paid the teachers very well. And so mom could be a stay-at-home mom. And so I grew up having mom around, my siblings, and our family was very happy. And then all of a sudden, bam, it's gone. We had to leave, and we ended up moving to Salt Lake City. And so I lost that community, that all my friends were there, my cousins were there, and we were safe. And also, we were so special. That's the drug. That is the thing that I will miss most about polygamy. The idea that I was special. That because I was an Allred, that, you know, my grandfather was in heaven right next to God and Jesus waiting for me. And that is a drug. And why would people let that go if they didn't have to? And we moved to downtown, we moved here to Murray, Utah. And my father's mom...
Real quick, wasn't your dad... Didn't he also discover sexual abuse that was happening?
This was later.
Okay.
So remember, there were two headquarters of the Allred group, one in Montana and one in Salt Lake.
Okay.
In Bluffdale. And so we moved here when I was 7. And then when I was 12, we actually broke away entirely because when my dad moved here to Utah from Montana, he then became closer to his uncle Owen, who was the prophet. Instead of being 500 miles away, he was now in Owen's pocket.
So the Jessups were in Montana.
Jessups were in Montana. Owen was down here. The Allreds were really down here now.
Okay.
But a lot of things changed. I don't want to embarrass my dad, but that transition was very painful, John, when we left Montana. Because again, it was such a happy memory that actually my dad had to be checked. My mom checked my dad into suicide watch because we left that life behind and we loved it so much. And to your point is, those happy childhood memories until I was 6 years old, for years at the subconscious level, a blind spot was well into my adult life, even after my sisters were married. I had this story subconsciously that, oh, we all just need to get back to Montana. Not Pinesdale, but somewhere in the area, and we can all be happy again. It was a very childish dream that I was holding on to, but I wasn't really aware consciously that I was. And that was such a powerful community, a sense of belonging. And you have to understand, that's why a lot of people join these polygamous cults. The idea that you belong to something greater than yourself, and you're a part of something. You have this great truth that no one else knows about. And also, you're so special. And So when we moved here to Utah, Mom started working, and I was the latchkey kid. I was the youngest, and it was tough. I hated Utah because I had the big giant hearing aids. I talked funny, and I was a huge target of bullying. And also, this is 1980s, and Allred name is still very synonymous with polygamy. And if there's one thing a Mormon doesn't like, it's a polygamous Mormon. How dare you remind us of our very curious 19th century past? Go away, lead me to my perfect paradigm, my Whiggish history where divine intervention is perfectly clear as I connect the dots. You know, we Mormons love those paintings in Costco where where George Washington is praying in the forest and there's an angel there, or somehow there's angels holding the hands of all our founding fathers, signing the Declaration of Independence. I mean, we love all those connect the dots history, and I'm a history major like my dad, and I enjoy how people choose their history to fit their paradigm, and so.
So Mormons didn't like polygamists?
No, they still don't. Yeah. And so I was a huge target of bullying. I was very introverted, very shy. And also, as a second grader, I was like the third biggest kid in the entire school. And people think, oh, well, you're big. You got bullied? I'm like, yeah, actually, you're a big guy too. In that you're told when you're a kid, we're so much bigger and stronger. Like, you have to be soft. You have to play with everybody. If you want people to like you, you have to be very soft with everybody. And so most big people are taught to be ashamed of their size and their strength. And we just want to have friends and we want to fit in. And so therefore you have all the little Napoleons come at you in school and try to torment you and bring you down, and so they look tough in front of the girls. And so as a kid I became very introverted, dealt with suicidal depression as a kid. But luckily, eventually, after we house hopped for a while, we settled into that little pod in Taylorsville where my cousins lived, and my dad's two brothers, and my grandmother, and my dad's mom. And it was nice. Then I felt safe again because I had my cousins. Because you see this a lot with polygamists in that our social skills are very delayed, arrested development, to say the least, in that they're very loud, they laugh loud, they have poor social cues. And that's because you're special. You don't have to worry about other people liking you. And also, if I say something wrong or do something stupid, they're still my cousins at the end of the day. So they're always going to have my back. So we don't really have to worry about developing social skills to make normal friendships in the world. Because it's kind of like, why would I want to be his friend? I already got my cousins, so I can be who I really want to be and not ever have to really work on compromise and communication skills and having different perspectives. And so when you see polygamists leave polygamy, they're very emotionally stunted when it comes to developing social skills, and I was no exception. And I'll get, oh gosh, it was awkward. Looking back on the social miscues that I made, even after we broke away from polygamy. But so Dad became the Bruce R. McConkie of the Allred group as a way of coping with his stress and everything, I'm sure, and his disappointment that. He was like, if I'm going to lose everything, if I'm going to be poor and struggling in my family and my wife has to go back to work, I'm going to make sure I know why we're doing it. And so Dad, the mental gymnastics that he can be, and Mormons are very good at mental gymnastics, he started writing all of his manifestos that even the Jeffs group, the FLDS church, uses his content. And the Allred group still uses his content. And Dad will tell you it's very well written, but it's full of crap. And I've read him, I chuckle, I laugh at him. I'm like, wow, my dad actually wrote this stuff. But yeah, so when I was 12, at the end of 6th grade, Dad had discovered that, yes, several of our leaders had been sexually abusing their kids for years. And I would go up and spend a lot of time in Pinesdale. Actually, my 4th grade year, I went and lived in Montana with my aunt and uncle and my grandma because it was that bad for me here in school in Utah.
You were allowed to return.
I was allowed to return, and I lived with them for 4th grade. And so I developed a very close bond with my mom's younger sister, not the one that was in the scandal, but the second one.
How is it that you were kicked out, but you were allowed to return?
We weren't really kicked out. Because again, the thing is, to say it's kicked out is too extreme in that We just left because the Jessups from the pulpit and from priesthood meeting were just making it hell for my dad. It's like, I can't be here anymore. It's just horrible. But the thing is, we were allowed to return because the AUB, Rulon Allred at the helm, still owned the property in Montana. The AUB owns all the property. The Jessups really are just the stewards, basically, if you want to view it that way. Not anymore, but they were at the time. And so it was kind of like they could never forbid us, but also, at the end of the day, the Jessups, I can respect them for this. Even while there was a power struggle between Morris and Marvin and my dad, they never took it out on kids. If there were adult disputes, kids were off limits. You didn't make any, except for the people that I recall that were just completely miserable. But actually, those people were here in Utah that would really just go out of their way to criticize my father by telling me. And then I had to go back and tell my dad about what he'd say. And so Dad had discovered that these two leaders, the Thompsons, have been sexually abusing their kids for years. And I remember this very clearly. We were actually up at General Conference in Montana, in Pinesdale that year. And Dad got the family around, my mom, all of her sisters, Grandma, and we're all sitting there in the living room, and my dad said this was happening. And right then, John, I knew it was over. As a 12-year-old kid, I knew it was over. Because, I don't know, I don't want to put myself on a pedestal, but with my hearing loss, I've always been forced to be very introspective, sit, watch people, watch their body languages. And so I've always been very sensitive to double standards, ironies. I'm like, wait, did you not just see that was happening? So I've always been very attuned to people watching and reading their body language and seeing those things. And so I was always very reflective as a kid. And the story that, I was Rulon's grandson. He's going to get us to heaven. But when I learned that Rulon actually knew about it shortly before he died, but didn't say anything, I'm like, well, and if Owen knew all this time, and yet they're prophets, they speak to God, that doesn't compute. Why would God allow this to happen? Or why would he not tell his prophets? Or maybe they're just not prophets at all. And so I knew then and there that it was over. And I thought it was all going to end for everybody. But we were the only ones that did leave. And so I learned. Isn't
it incredible how resilient religion is? You think
really is.
Something really big is going to happen, and really it's going to change everything. And it's like a flick.
It really is. So I learned at the age of 12, I learned that religion for most people is mostly psychological. It has nothing to do with spirituality. And that we were the only ones that left, and my parents were the only people, because I had aunts and uncles who were, yes, trapped in polygamous marriages. I don't want to say trapped, but they had made these commitments to their second or third wife who'd given them kids. So where they're supposed to tell that wife, the second wife, hey, good luck, you take the kids, we take the kids. Not that simple. They're in a very tough predicament there that I would never want to trade places with them. So how could I ever judge them? Ever. But I also have monogamous uncles and aunts who, again, could not let go of the idea that they were special. So my parents were the only people in the entire Allred group who could put aside their own fragile ego, my dad especially, because everyone was expecting him to get married again, and then he'd be eligible to become the next prophet. Because we were kind of the bastard family, being monogamous. We were worthy, we weren't quite worthy, did all that guilt and social abuse. But I had that belief, that hope that one day Dad would get married again so we could step into our place and help everybody. Because not only yes, I was a kid, I liked the idea of my dad being the boss, of being in charge. Every kid likes that idea. But I also liked what my parents stood for and how they stood up for everybody else. And I wanted them to become the leaders, and that everyone else we could truly become that socialist commune.
And did you have a dream for yourself about maybe what role you might play when you grew up?
I mean, what kid doesn't? I'm not going to lie. I mean, if I'm proud of my dad, I love my dad, and I want to make my dad proud of me.
Did you want to be a prophet someday?
Sure, because that was part of the family legacy. It's like Rulon was doing that. He was assassinated. I want to make him proud. I want to make my dad proud. Absolutely. And you know, I don't know, maybe I do have that ego, but I would like to think that almost every kid has that dream. Kind of like every kid has a dream when they're on the basketball court shooting the basketball, they're going to play in the NBA someday, you know? And then therefore, with that story about, oh, I'll be a prophet and then I'll be worthy, because at the age of 5, there were some dark things about growing up in Montana, but you heard about it in the TED Talk. At the age of 5, I had a Sunday school teacher tell me that God had made me deaf as a form of punishment. And rather than sending me to earth as a black man, and that's why men were black, because they sat on the Holy War they sat on the fence in the Great Holy War, in the pre-existence, as Brigham Young said. God was nice enough just to send me to earth as a deaf man. But at least I was white, right? So I should be grateful for that. So I had this, while there were many wonderful things about growing up in polygamy, there was that dark side, the guilt and the shame and the self-worth aspect that I had to earn love, that I had to somehow atone for some past sin that I had no recollection of. And that guilt, really, I could say, was the impetus for why you know what? Not only do I want mom and dad to stick up for everybody, but if mom and dad become the next prophets and they're doing everything right, then that'll lessen my burden of having to earn God's love. Then we're on the right path. And so alleviating that fear that I was going to go to hell, that if I didn't step into my place. I had that kind of fear, John. I truly believed in hell. And I was worried about my eternal well-being all the time. And we'll keep in this vein in that when we broke away from polygamy, the last Sunday school, priesthood lesson I ever heard was that homosexuality is the greatest sin in the world. There's no atoning for that. They said you immediately go into hell. On any one act, you're going to hell. But also that masturbation leads to homosexuality. So here I am, a 12, 13-year-old kid going into puberty, right? And I see Cameron Diaz for the first time in the movie The Mask, and I'm like, wow, she's really pretty. It's making my body feel things. I want to act on an urge, but wait. If I feel that urge that maybe I want to masturbate, does that mean I'm gay? And bam, that's when the OCD started. The thing about obsessive-compulsive disorder is that we know these thoughts are stupid. We know they're not rational, but you can't stop thinking about them. So imagine the loss of foundation, that we escaped from polygamy. We actually had to go in hiding. The Salt Lake County lead detective, Detective Fisher, came and got us out of our home.
Why are you going into hiding?
Because, you know what, Detective Fisher, because everyone's very angry with my dad. Because instead of now people being angry with these prophets that were abusing their kids, now dad becomes the scapegoat. Dad's standing up, dad's not staying in his place, dad's rattling the paradigm. You know what? We don't have to think about these prophets anymore. We now can project our anger onto Vance. He's being the bad boy. He needs to stay in his place. Because by dad leaving, and dad's a theologian, he's a doctrinaire, and if he's saying, I'm out, what does that say for everybody else in their religion? And so
were the threats on his life? Or?
That's what Detective Fisher believed. And so that's the thing about absolutes. When you grow up in a world of absolutes, that you're special, that your grandfather is a prophet, that you have the one true church with a capital T, absolutes are very dangerous. And most people will do anything they can to protect that. And they're very, very dangerous. And that's why you see violence in extreme religious situations, because people want to hold on to the idea that they're special. It becomes a base survival instinct, that's black and white story, that they have absolute truth. And they've invested all these years of their life, their blood, their sweat, their tears into this idea that, wait, you're making us think about it? No, it's just time for you to go. Just cut him out completely, and they can go back to living in your fantasy world. And that's the thing people have to understand. Whether it's polygamy or mainstream Mormonism, we know we're going to die. That gives us huge fear. We're cursed with the existential awareness of our own mortality. And we have religion to pacify that with beautiful stories. The Mormon story is a beautiful story. You get to live for time and all eternity with your family, and everyone suddenly has the same personality. sound like hell to me, but to many people sound like heaven. And that's another thing is, if God wanted us all to be the same, he would have made us the same from the get-go. But that's a whole nother tangent. But and so people have these stories as a comfort blanket. Why would they let go of that comfort blanket if they didn't have to? You're asking people to let go of a lot and step into a world of unknown. But that's the thing about absolutes. Absolutes, they make us feel safe. They're able to compartmentalize a very abstract world and make sense of it in a black and white absolutes, black and white paradigms. Us versus them, right, wrong. And it makes things very simple. And life's easier when you have all the answers. And I miss having all the answers. I wish I could go back and bury my head in the sand some days and think, oh, everything's good. I don't have to sit here and wonder about the point of it all. And like, you know what? I just have to know, all I have to do is follow the prophet and everything will be fine. And that's the thing, though. A lot of people, when they come into polygamy, the appeal of another appeal of polygamy is that people get to absolve themselves of accountability by saying, you know what, all I have to do is follow the prophet. He'll hold my hand, he'll get me to heaven, and he says I'm a good person. So therefore, I don't have to worry about what's going to happen to me after I die or this or that. But the catch-22 of it all is that actually you're doubling down on accountability. Because if something bad happens to you, or your family, a child dies or whatever, it's like, wait, what happened? I was doing everything the prophet said. I'm living God's law. Why would God punish me? Why would God make this happen? Which is a Mormon thought pattern. When something bad happens, you think immediately it's something that you did wrong. And so why would God punish me? But then the prophet will say, oh, well, yeah, maybe you weren't worthy enough. Maybe you didn't pray hard enough. Because the system is never wrong. The prophet is never wrong. So you're actually doubling down on accountability. It flips back onto you, which is kind of like MLMs, social marketing, whatever, network marketing. And so, but that's why polygamists and Mormons are awesome, awesome candidates for network marketing, because they know how to play that game. And so I can talk about these kind of ideas all day long.
So your dad, your family went into hiding.
We went into hiding.
Pretty much no one left except for
just us.
Just
so
you guys.
12, this is 1993. We went into hiding, hopped through summer cabins. Luckily, my mom's side of the family, the Ripplingers. My uncle Don Ripplinger was the Mormon Tabernacle Choir director. And the Ripplingers could have very easily cut us off when my grandmother joined polygamy. But they didn't. They kept inviting us to family reunions, over the Christmas parties, the Thanksgiving parties, never judging us, always letting us feel welcomed. And because of that, that allowed us to reach out to them when we needed help. And I wish every Mormon church and family could see that. Just because, and this, I wrote about this in the Salt Lake Tribune last November, when the church came out with the children of gay people, the policy against the children of gay people. And I told them in this article, this op-ed, that people who are in need of help aren't going to come ask for help from people who have been calling them sinners all of their lives. It just doesn't work that way. So if the church did a better job of having an actual outreach group to help women and children and the lost boys of the Allred group find a place to land on, a footing, that would be huge. But then they say, well, polygamists do that, but they do that to then join the group and then recruit within the wards. I'm like, is that their fault, or is it the church's fault that the people, the members of that ward aren't, their testimonies or their faith isn't strong enough that they can be that easily swayed to join another group? Really, whose fault is that, if you think about it? And second, the reason why they're swayed is because they realize you've been withholding information. If the Mormon church would just own its history, say, yeah, we have polygamy, this is something we choose not to do anymore, but let's educate everyone about it. I grew up in a home, John, where we read Journal of Discourses, we read Pearl of Great Price, we read all of these things. So, as a kid, yeah, Joseph Smith was reading from a stone in a hat. No biggie. Whatever, totally cool. Polygamy, yeah. And so that is the one thing that I would tell the Mormon Church, is that just own your history and there'll be a lot less backlash. And people will less likely feel that they've been conned, that they've been duped. And a lot of people will say, well, you know, if I had known about Joseph Smith and polygamy as a kid, I never would have gone on a mission. I'm like, really though? Because if you grow up in childhood where you believe that he found these golden plates on the hill, and he wore this big giant breastplate with stones and was able to transcribe it all there, to say that this man then was ordered by God to practice polygamy isn't too much of a stretch.
That's all weird, right?
It's all weird.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just like, you can't like somehow say that's like the final straw when you're being brainwashed with all this information at such an early age. When you're a kid, your brain doesn't know how to decipher fact from fiction, that you're just taking everyone at face value, at their word. And so the Mormon Church, the fear that there will be a backlash, if you just tell the kids at a very early age, if you're already telling them, follow the prophet in that minor key, right? It's not too much of a stretch to say, well, yeah, Joseph Smith practiced polygamy because that was God's law, but he doesn't order that law anymore. Kids aren't going to say, wow, that's weird, that's creepy. They're going to say, okay, I got it. It makes sense. And that's just one thing that why I chuckle, but two, even when people who have escaped Mormonism or broken away, they use polygamy as a focal point to be angry or validate their stance against the church. I said, well, really? No. And I'll talk more about how I kind of came out of my place down that line. But
I think you're right. We're seeing it now. The church is changing its curriculum. It's starting to inoculate its youth, and they're still going on missions.
Exactly.
So inoculation has won. The essays, they've led some people out, but I think there's a good chance that the church's essays are actually successfully inoculating most of the members.
Absolutely.
Such that less Mormons in the future are going to feel betrayed and deceived. And so in some ways, those of us who were a part of convincing the church to be more candid and to release the essays have actually helped the church be stronger in the future.
Fun ironies. Huh?
Fun ironies. But let's not get derailed. So your family goes into hiding. Tell us about OCD.
OCD. So, here's that thing that happens. Yeah, I just went off on a Rulon Allred tangent there. I apologize. I'm usually pretty good at staying on point. My dad is the master of tangents. So OCD starts in that I have this thought, wait, so we settle in downtown Salt Lake when the detective says the heat has died down enough that we can kind of settle in downtown Salt Lake, but we don't let anyone know this is where we settled. And I started going to school at Bryant Junior High. And again, I'm going through puberty. My body that 8th grade year grew from 5'10" to 6'4". So I slept a lot. And
6 inches in 1 year?
Yeah, it was brutal. And I didn't play.
What grade?
8th grade.
8th grade.
I never played organized sports before that time. I didn't. My ear imbalance with my hearing loss was atrocious. I was just a Nintendo kid growing up. Wow. And I was really good at it. At that time, imagine the loss of foundation. All of my cousins have been my best friends. They're gone now. We're in hiding. We're living on the run. We're leaving the Allred group, the world that I knew to be true, that my grandfather was a prophet and I was special. But wait, I'm not special anymore. I'm just some deaf polygamous kid, ex-polygamous kid now. At least I always had that I was special, that my grandfather was a prophet. I always had that going for me, and now I don't have it anymore. So I could totally understand why people cannot let go of the idea that they were special, because I know how hard it was for me. And so with all that loss of foundation, the story that, masturbation leads to homosexuality, and that's the worst sin in the world, and we joined the Mormon Church. So we're still talking about Brigham Young, who said that black people were black because he sat on the fence in the Great Holy War. So I still had this distorted story that God had punished me because I had done something wrong in the pre-existence and I had to earn love. as an adult, it makes no sense. But when you're a 12-year-old kid growing up in this world, that makes perfect sense. And so I would be sitting there in school at Bryan Junior High, pretty girl, be sitting next to me. She'd be wearing a skirt, beginning of school, it's summertime. Very pretty. She makes me feel these feelings. I'm like, oh gosh, but what are these feelings? Oh, does that mean I want to act on these feelings? Does that mean I might want to masturbate? Does that mean that I'm gay? But I want to be gay. I like girls. Yeah, but you don't know. You never know. But I like girls. I couldn't possibly be gay. Yeah, but still, what does this mean? So I'm totally hetero, 100% hetero, and I'm not threatened by homosexuality at all now. But as a kid, when you believe that homosexuality is the worst sin, so my compulsion would be I would sneak out of class and I would go pray. I would pray like 10, 15 times a day, saying, please, God, don't be angry with me. Don't be angry with me. I'm so sorry that I'm even having these thoughts. And so that's when the OCD started to kick in. It's just that religious dogma, how they control you. And that's the greatest con we've ever been sold, is that you have to earn love. And that's how people control you.
So have you listened to my episode about scrupulosity?
No, I haven't actually.
Have you heard of the term scrupulosity?
No, educate me.
Okay, no. So for my master's of my PhD in psychology, I did a study on something called scrupulosity. Scrupulosity is purely the name for religious OCD.
Okay.
So there's a name for it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm glad to know. Thank you.
Scrupulosity, it's what you had.
Okay.
Compulsive praying.
Yeah.
Compulsive scripture reading.
Okay.
Obsessing, ruminating about guilt and shame. Confessing to your church leader.
Absolutely.
To your priest or to your bishop.
Absolutely.
That's all called scrupulosity, and it's a thing. It's a thing.
We learn something new every day.
So you need to go back and listen to the scrupulosity
I'm going to go watch it.
episode of Mormon Stories. Go read up on it. It's a thing.
I'm excited.
And it's one of the coolest mental illnesses because it's so fascinating. It's fascinating.
No, I'm a textbook case for it, I guess, then. That makes sense.
No, you are.
I'm glad to know that there's actually... Because I would count saying, like, yeah, the doctor just put me on Effexor. He said it was kind of OCD, but when people say, well, did you, like, flick the light switch or jump over cracks? I'm like, it wasn't like that. So I always felt kind of like, do I say OCD? Or I guess now I can just say no, scrupulosity. Scrupulosity. I love it. I learned something new. Thank you.
Scrupulosity, that's the word.
It makes my life a lot easier now. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
And so I was a textbook case for it. But luckily at that same time, that's when I started playing basketball. That the basketball coach saw me walking down the hallway one day, and he says, hey, wow, you're a really tall kid. You should come try out for the basketball team. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I don't really have any friends, and it'd be a good way to meet people. I don't really have to communicate. Little did I know that team sports requires extreme amounts of communication. But I started playing. At first I wasn't very good, but it was a good way for me to fit in, find new friends, and to belong to something again. Kind of like I lost my community, but now I have another community that I can belong to. That's more important than me as an individual, but as a team. And so there was so much baggage, though, John, I brought into it that I realized. But again, because I grew up in this black and white world of socialism, everyone should have a chance. We're socialists, we're a team. That I would always struggle a lot of times at basketball teams throughout my career when I see double standards or when coaches being hypocritical or there were preferential treatment. And that was a lot of baggage I brought. That was my polygamy that I took into my adult life. But also the big one was that I truly did believe that I had to do something great and then God would be proud of me. And that was, okay, now I know what it is. I have to be the first deaf player in NBA history and then God will be proud of me. And I couldn't play basketball with my hearing aids in because of sweat and concussion issues. So I was out there playing just whatever. I had to learn to be very visual. I had to approach it like a game of chess, always account for all the other 9 guys. As a center, as a big man, my back was always to the basket, so I could see where everyone else was and always be accounting for them and approaching it like a game of chess. And
so 100% deaf without your hearing aids?
About 80% hearing loss without hearing aids. About 80%. And so I hear percussions, bass sounds. That's what I hear when it's high pitch or whistles on whatever. So I've had to learn to always just stop. When everyone else stops, suddenly stop. you know, and but you always had those awkward moments where I'd play through the whistle and it was like, Lance, just chill out, play it over. I'm like, oh, sorry. But those were the challenges, but because I was so visual, that's the thing about being an underdog, that you learn to see life, not just basketball, but you see life through a different lens. And so you're always thinking outside the box. And so I would always do little different things and little habits that would help me quickly remember other teams' plays. I would just little formulas I would do. But also, you watch people's body language. That, okay, I'm on defense. Other team's small forward is acting way too casual right now. That means he's probably going to come off the baseline on a double staggered up for a jumper here. And so you just learn to be very perceptive of people's body language. And also, another thing, in the fourth quarter of a loud arena, everyone's deaf. And so in the land of temporary deafness, the permanently deaf man is king. And so you're not always the underdog.
So when did you go from clumsy, awkward, kid to like
semi-legitimate
to like?
Yeah.
Like, was there AUB or like
AUB basketball?
Those sort of elite leagues in Salt Lake City.
Well, yeah.
Did you start? What grade did you start saying, "Hey, I may have a future in this"?
The thing is, because I was growing so much and so tall, everyone, the doctors predicted I'd be about 6'11", 7 feet. So I'm like, you know what? That's an opportunity for me to do this. But right at the get-go, I already had so many people telling me I couldn't do it. I was too deaf. I wasn't hearing the plays. I wasn't reading the lips. I was too clumsy, too awkward. And, people all my life have been telling me, sorry, this is not a gimmick. I just have to itch my ear. All my life, what I can and can't do. And my joke is I choose not to listen. I can't hear very well anyway. And so what happened was, not only was it a way to fit in, but I still had that. People have many avenues of inspiration of why they go and achieve their dreams. It's not just one single thing. Yes, did I want to be really good at something? Yeah, I want to be a great basketball player. Did I want to have friends? Did I want to be popular? Yeah. Did I want to prove people wrong? Yeah, spite's a great motivator, but it's empty calories when you get there to the end. And also there was love. I was playing for love, for worth. And I was playing so that God would be proud of me. And I truly believed I had to be the first deaf player in NBA history, and then God would be proud of me. And then I'd be worthy to go to heaven. I had that really distorted thought pattern. That was my polygamous thought pattern growing up as a teen. And so that fear of not being good enough, that I wouldn't be able to go to heaven, that fear was one of the great motivators that kept me. But again, love, and I actually really enjoyed basketball too. My parents had to wake me up 0 times. But for 3 years, going to East High School, I woke up at 5:30 every morning, and I went and worked with my high school coach, Kerry Rupp, who's now the assistant head coach at Oregon State. He didn't receive an extra dime working with me, but he knew how important that was for me. And so through a lot of labor, through a lot of hard work, hours and hours and hours, it wasn't until the end of my junior year that I starting for East High School in downtown Salt Lake there. And
you were 6'8" by then?
I was about 6'9".
Okay.
And I started playing really well. I just had these awesome games where like, hey, you know what? My breakout game, I remember, gosh, why we remember these things is like glory days.
No, this is what year about?
This is 1998.
98.
My junior year.
Okay. East High School.
East High School. My first game as a starter, coach took a chance on me, but that game, then in the fourth quarter, I had like 12 points. And that's a big deal in high school basketball where you don't have a shot clock. Having 12 points as a junior for me, that was a really big, that was kind of like the momentum builder for confidence in me. And
you were a center?
I was a center.
So most of your points were posting up?
Posting up, yeah. I wasn't a jump shooter. I was just always a center, rebounding. But Coach Rupp was an amazing coach as far as skill development for big men. And he went with me to the University of Utah. At the end of that junior year, I didn't have any recruitment letters or anything. I went to an AAU tournament. a last-minute invite for a guy that couldn't show up, so I went to fill in for somebody, because again, I really was kind of a no-name.
Here in Salt Lake.
Here in Salt Lake,
okay.
Even in Salt Lake. Because, most kids, they start doing those AAU tournaments in 7th, 8th grade, and they start developing, like, the buzz and the hype, and I didn't know anything about that. And so end of junior year, I get invited to go to California, and I showed up a no-name, but then I left that weekend ranked the best center in the West. And
multiple states?
Multiple states.
How'd you do that?
It was just, I just came out of nowhere and just like, wait, who is this kid running around just... And that's the thing about Coach Rupp is that, I never was the greatest leaper. I never had the biggest vertical.
You could dunk, though.
I could dunk, of course. Yeah, I could dunk. But the thing about Coach Rupp taught me, he taught me a lot like, to be a lot like Tim Duncan, in that, just for longevity, if my whole game is simply based on dunking and blocking shots, there's always going to be someone younger, faster, stronger than me. So Coach Rupp taught me a lot of skills, cerebral skills, as far as being able to face up, being able to shoot bank shots, being able to shoot the 15-foot shot, being able to pick and pop. When someone's bigger than you is playing against you, who wants to block your shot, take him outside, shoot shots on him, shoot left hand and right hand. He taught me to be ambidextrous. And that as a professional, I actually scored more points with my left hand than my right hand, even though I'm right-handed. In the paint, I learned to score more with my left hand, so people wouldn't know which way I was going. But that was part of, again, maybe that's the way my brain works too, because I don't hear very well. My brain my senses are always kind of in hyperdrive as far as feeling, seeing, touching, smelling. And so challenging me to be ambidextrous actually came pretty natural to me. And so the ability to score with both hands, to always run the floor every time. So I wasn't the greatest leaper, but I was fast. And that I would race with my guards on the track, just try to outrun them all the time. And I knew how to run. And I didn't have the longest wingspan. My body's proportional. It's 6'11" wingspan, 6'11" height. So actually, from a distance, I don't look 6'11". You don't look that big either, but when people get up to you, I'm like, he's actually a really big guy, because you're not long and gangly. You're just kind of proportional. And so Coach Rupp taught me all those subtle little things of how to set a screen, how to roll, how to read the defense to know when to slip off the screen or the pop, or to read the defense, just so that, again, I was playing chess with my sight. Because I couldn't hear what my teammates were saying. I just learned to watch what everyone's doing and say, all right, time to slash here, time to bump on the stagger or whatever. And so those little things that Coach Rupp taught me and kind of just amplifying my visual skills that I was developing, that's what allowed me to kind of come up out of nowhere. But here's a little thing I didn't know. This is 1998, the year that Utah lost to Kentucky in the national championship game.
Van Horn and Andre Miller.
Van Horn, it was Doliak and Andre Miller. Van Horn graduated in 97.
That's
he
right.
was drafted with Tim Duncan in 98. Doliak and Andre Miller went to the championship game with Hanno Metala and the gang, Britton Johnson. And the year before, and the sophomore year, when I was still a nobody, Coach Rupp took me up to the University of Utah, and I went to a camp, Rick Majerus basketball camp. And I remember I was so enamored with Rick Majerus, because his attention to detail, how he could take anyone like Keith Van Horn or Mike Doliak and make them NBA players. That I knew I was never going to be that guy who was dunking, alley-ooping on people, blocking a lot of shots. And so I just fell in love with this idea of playing for Coach Majerus and his attention to detail, the rules, and all that, the system, and that everyone knows their role. And the thing is, if you want a team of socialist communist to work, everyone has to know their role. Majerus was all about everyone knowing their roles. But sadly, a lot of times socialist communists don't work. That's why they become dictatorships. But I didn't know these things, and neither did Coach Rupp at the time. And after that junior year, that tournament, when I came back, ranked the best center in the West, I got scholarship offers from Utah, Stanford, Kansas, Purdue, and BYU, but we just don't do BYU. But Majerus actually had offered me a scholarship to Coach Rupp in the middle of my junior year, but Coach Rupp didn't tell me. They didn't tell me. They just wanted me to keep working hard. So I already had a scholarship long before, even before they went to the championship game. And it was a no-brainer. I mean, but sadly, yeah, I was a history and English major, and Stanford's offering me a full-ride scholarship. But I'm living 2 blocks away from the University of Utah. My family's going to school there. They'd just gone to the national championship game. And I believed my grandfather was a prophet. Rulon Allred was a prophet. They were going to get me to heaven. But now, Rick Majerus is going to get me to the NBA. That's going to get me to heaven.
Your new prophet.
He's my new prophet.
Now, let's pause for a second. Had you lost your faith by this point?
No.
Okay, so you're still believing.
Yeah. So we joined the LDS Church. Good question. We joined the LDS Church, and I'll be honest, I really liked Gordon B. Hinckley. I liked the guy. He meant a lot to me. But I never at one point ever believed that he somehow actually spoke to God on my behalf.
You'd been burned.
I've been burned enough to realize, you know what, he's just a human. And to think that he could somehow speak to God on behalf of 10 million different people, different personalities, just doesn't make any sense to me. He can teach us kindness and everything, but to think that one system applies for everybody, if that was true, then people wouldn't leave. There wouldn't be disenchantment. Everyone would be happy. The system applies for your traditional families. And, you know, being a single parent now, thinking, oh my gosh, how would I, even if I wanted to, how could I even go back and sit in church? I don't know. So I still believe, though, John, even though I didn't believe that Gordon B. Hinckley spoke to God on my behalf, I still read the Book of Mormon. I still did my studying and research. And again, it wasn't like I was unveiling anything new ever. When people use the term studying, I'm doing my studying to find out all of the information now about the church. Like, yeah, that's what I did all the time when I was a teenager. That, I guess I was at a place where I accepted that the Mormon church itself was flawed. That it simply was a tool that was mainstream to help reach as many people. But I still believed in the gospel and the teachings and the foundations of it. But above and all, that I was the type of kid, when I became seminary council president at East High School, it wasn't like my testimony was about Joseph Smith or Gordon B. Hinckley. It was about Jesus Christ. You know, I prided myself on being a Christian before being a Mormon. That's how I was different, if you want to say. And so when I accepted to go play at the University of Utah, by then my sister and my brother Court had both served LDS missions. And they both had complete mental breakdowns, nervous breakdowns. And so here's the thing, John, is that when we broke away from polygamy, my parents got us kids into psychotherapy and counseling, and we're working with these counselors that are telling us it's okay to question authority. It's okay to question reality. And so once you do all that work to break outside of that tiny little box, that paradigm that is polygamy, it's really, really hard to ever go back inside of another perfect little box. And yet that's what my siblings did. They went on their missions, which is a very tiny, tight little box, and they just completely broke down.
It's a little bit weird, and I felt this with your dad. It's a little bit weird that he left one, I don't know if cult's the right word, but if he left one just fundamentalist religion and kind of moved to another one, because your dad's super smart. And
let's talk about that.
Yeah, talk about that. How do you explain that?
The Mormon church is child's play compared to polygamy. So it's like, okay, we're leaving this tiny little basketball court. I'm going to join the LDS church, which is like a big, giant baseball field. There's still rules, but it's a little bit more room to maneuver. Whereas if you want to go on an LDS mission, you got to go sit in the dugout, basically. So we were leaving one paradigm that was very small and just insanely intense, going into another paradigm. But it's kind of like the frog out of hot water, the frog in hot water analogy. If you had taken us out of polygamy right away into nothing, that would have been too much shell shock, too much culture shock. Like, who are we anymore?
Yeah, depression as it was.
Yeah. Instead, it was a smooth transition in that it allowed us to start questioning authority, but we still had the foundation, or I guess a belief that Joseph Smith and God and all that stuff still fits, right? And also, I'm glad that it allowed us to fit in. Community. That we had in the downtown Salt Lake area, that ward, the University Ward, is the progressive stake in the entire LDS Church. In that pretty much all of them are like Mormons building bridges, pro-gay marriage, very, very progressive. And so that's why, too, we were able to do it. It was a very liberal ward where they were very accepting and not very judgmental at all. Whereas if you said, yeah, let's join the Mormon church and go live in Draper, Utah, I've been like, yeah, no, we couldn't have done that.
Okay.
So that's how we were able to do it, the liberal context of downtown Salt Lake City, where people have a lot more open psychological boundaries to explore. But also, it was less of a culture shock for us. And so I would say that's how it works.
Got it.
And so...
But your brothers, you had mentioned that your brothers
brother and my sister,
had two siblings, awful mission experiences. So when it comes time for you to consider a mission...
It comes time, I was scared of blowback for sure, and I was so afraid of my parents being upset with me, but I had such a fear of going on a mission. One, I had fallen in love with basketball so much, but my whole identity was in being a basketball player. Because again, that's my self-worth. It's going to get me to heaven. I need to play in the NBA. That if I take 2 years off, I might lose that because if I'm just another Mormon leveling the playing field with all the other Mormons, I still have this whole story behind it. There's a fear of that, but also just a fear of seeing what happened to my siblings, of losing my freedom to explore my emotional and psychological boundaries. That was terrifying for me. So
was the OCD still raging?
Oh yes, and that's the thing is, luckily I was able to hide it and channel it through basketball. And that instead of me worrying about girls or homosexuality or masturbation or hell, I can now obsess about that missed shot or that turnover or that bad play. And I would go home every night, John, and just replay all the mistakes in my head.
That's good, right?
Over and over.
I mean, it was good for performance.
It was good for performance.
Was it?
It was. But here's the thing is, sadly, because I put so much pressure on myself that every made or missed shot in my mind had like eternal ramifications. And so there's a fine line. There's a fine line that how much is too much. But the accountability I held myself to always get better, that's what allowed me to really propel so fast. And but also because I had that much weight on my shoulders, I didn't have as much fun as I could have. And that I was such an adult at such an early age, and that even when we moved to Utah, that's kind of like when I feel like a lot of my childhood ended, and that everything just became so serious.
Yeah.
And
but not everyone makes it to the NBA, so you have to wonder whether that OCD perfectionism drove your excellence.
Absolutely. No. I get it. So,
and it robs you of the fun, which is ironic.
It is ironic. So it's a catch-22.
Yeah.
In that, people often ask me, if you hadn't had that polygamous upbringing of fear and guilt, do you think you would have made the NBA? I'm like, that's a very good question, and I do not know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's part of who I am. It's part of the nature versus nurture. How much of it is my parents' work ethic that their parents have? Because, that stuff is passed down through genetics. If you look at both sides of the family, the Ripplingers are just insane hard workers. From some of the first homesteaders up in the Teton Valley. They were just dirt poor, but they loved living the land there. And so a lot of it is genetics, but a lot of it is the nature and the nurture. So it's a balance of it. So it's a fair question to ask, and I can't give you a fair answer other than saying that I believe it all comes into play, no doubt. And so I decided not to go on my mission, and I was terrified, but I told my parents about it. My parents just kind of sighed, and they said, yes, thank you, we don't want you to go either. Because they themselves, around the same time, when my brother wanted to come home from his mission, my dad dealt with the mission president and the state president, and there was a lot of bad advice and guilt thrown at my dad and my brother. And so that was kind of also the beginning of the end for my parents as well. And that, once again, they left polygamy for their kids, their family. They wanted those kids to have the best opportunities possible. So now we're here in Mormonism, and my parents are once again being challenged to put their faith ahead of their kids. And my parents are like, no, our kids will always come first. And that, I think that marked the beginning of their exodus. It was a slow exodus, kind of like mine. But that allowed them, once again to start questioning authority. And I chose not to go on a mission. And of course, the horror, within a week, there were rumors that I had gotten a girl pregnant and all that stuff. And it's ridiculous. No, I'll just be blunt. I was a virgin until I was 25, right? I still had all that hell and shame and fear and guilt. But here I am, 18, deciding not to go on a mission. All of a sudden, the rumors are flying around. And so, but that thing is, it didn't, people, the guilt and the shame of the critics, and I developed a thick skin. If you want to be a basketball player, you're going to have people hate you. You just are. And that you're just a projection of most people's own angst and worries and fears and their own paradigm, really. And that people would watch me play basketball and they think they know me. But they really don't. I'm just a character on a stage. I'm either the good guy or the bad guy or the whiner or whatever, And so I'm just entertainment for them. And so I was already developing a thick skin to criticism. And so when I decided not to go on the mission, I got a lot of blowback and criticism. And people would guilt and shame me and always feel like they needed to give me their 2 cents about how, basketball is only so many years, but your spirituality is eternal. I'm like, yeah, I get it.
Who's telling you that?
Oh, lots of people.
Like
bishops or friends in high school or girls or that were waiting for their missionaries or teammates who would come back from their missions, all sorts of feedback like that. And, it's, that was really the beginning of the end for me, because it's kind of like, wait, you guys trying to guilt me and make me feel bad. I'm so glad I do it, because why would I go waste 2 years of my life for people like you if your love is conditional? If you like me only if I do this, you don't deserve my time and my labor to bring people into your fold.
There was a BYU coach around this time. There was some athlete that was trying to decide between
Chris Burgess.
Duke and
my teammate Chris Burgess.
Was that happening around time?
Yeah.
What do you mean your teammate?
Yeah, he actually went to the University of Utah. He went to Duke, but then he left Duke and he came to the University of Utah.
Oh, I didn't know.
It was Roger Reed who went to BYU.
He was guilting people too, right?
He guilted the hell out of people. And he put Chris Burgess on the guilt for disappointing 10 million Mormons for not going to BYU. And Burgess didn't buy it, but then Burgess ended up going to Utah, and he and I became very good friends because, again, we're both these Mormon kids who decided not to go on a mission. But he's one of the highest caliber people you'll ever meet, and it's not that phony, shallow nice. He's actually someone that's been through the grinder, and he's a good person, and I'm proud of him. And he and I actually both had the longest professional basketball careers of our entire collegiate network of teammates, and we both played,
including Andre Miller and
Andre Miller actually. Yeah, Andre Miller, he's the longest one, but Andre Miller was he graduated 99. That was my senior year in high school. Burgess and I both came in 99 2000.
Got
so
it.
he graduated just before we showed up.
Okay.
Andre Miller had such a long career. He's a heck of a player. I'm a big fan of his, and he's a great guy too.
Let me ask you just really quickly. We skipped over this, and I'm just curious.
We got so much.
I care. Your senior year, did East High do well? Was it well celebrated? Were you the big star in the state?
Yeah.
Were there rivalries? I'm just curious.
Yeah. We were East High School. Oh, that would always be a sad spot in my life. Because that senior year, we were ranked preseason number 1, and but I had come out such a late bloomer that the other kids that had been doing the AAU or throughout all their lives, some of them just were not happy that, wait, Lance is now suddenly the big shot. And so the high school politics and the parental bickering, and luckily my parents knew nothing about basketball. My dad hates basketball. So they didn't coach me in anything. They just stayed out of my way completely. And I tell that to parents, if you're trying to get your kids to play sports, just stop. Figure out what their passion is and support them. And find out what that passion is and back them up 100%. Your kids don't need to live their lives for you. You've had your shot, let them live their life. And I always learned, I knew the teammates that were playing for their parents, I knew you couldn't rely on them because in the fourth quarter when the pressure was so great, the love and the passion wasn't there to carry them through that pressure. And so they're just wasting their time, parents' time, our time. But a lot of those same teammates who were playing for their parents became very hostile to Coach Rupp, to a lot of the situations. So there's just a lot of things just fell apart at the wheels.
So you're saying there were politics at East High?
Oh yeah, in high school there's serious politics.
So you weren't starting, or what?
No, I was starting, but let's just say someone tried to have Coach Rupp fired. There's all this stuff, and also for me too.
That sounds crazy.
It sounds crazy, but that's just how parents are when they think every kid is special, no doubt, but not every kid's a star. Sorry, helicopter parents. Got to break that one to you. So also, I take a lot of ownership too, in that.
Well, did the year not go well?
The year did not go.
What happened?
We lost in the first round, and that.
But how was the regular season?
We limped because we were just losing a lot of games. I actually got really sick. I had mono and pneumonia at the same time. And I missed a few games there because I got so sick. But also just the pressure. The year before we lost in the first round, it was just East High School, but then all of a sudden I come out of nowhere but in the off season. And all of a sudden we're now the number one ranked team. Just because there's Lance Allred on that team. Yeah. And so I think we all felt so much pressure that the pressure to suddenly just be the best team, we all just kind of collapsed underneath it.
Was it 4A?
It was 4A.
Okay.
Yeah, 4A. And
but that didn't hurt your scholarship hopes?
No. I already had my scholarship with Majerus, and despite not having shot clocks in high school, I wish high school would get shot clocks. Because what a lot of teams would do, John, that they would just hold the ball for the whole quarter. They wouldn't shoot. So the games would sometimes be like 18-16. Because they just didn't. Like Judge Memorial would do that with us. And so, because instead of letting me have the ball and actually abuse people, they would just hold the ball. So I wish Utah, our high school sports, would put a shot clock in. But also, despite all that, I averaged 17 points and 10 rebounds a game. And I was the Gatorade Player of the Year for Utah. And so the scholarship was fine. We went through to that. And but Coach Rupp...
Gatorade Player of the Year for the state?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for the state of Utah.
So you did well?
I did well. I did what I had to do.
But the team didn't do well?
No, we didn't do well at all. And again, there were parts where I could have done so much better, and I put so much pressure on myself that, but again, you're kids. You're just kids, and you're learning how to deal with all this pressure. And but a couple of those teammates and I are still very, very close. Awesome people. And so went to the University of Utah, but I decided too late not to go on my mission. And Majerus had already given my scholarship to Chris Burgess, who was transferring from Duke. So I actually had to sit out that year as a gray shirt, which means I didn't have a scholarship. I couldn't practice with the team, so I could only take half classes as well. But I used that year as an opportunity to work with a strength coach and just gain like 25 pounds of muscle, which allowed me to go from being a stick to actually looking like somewhat of a man. And then the freshman year started. Okay, so I want to... Go ahead.
We're about at the end of kind of this episode.
Okay.
So I want the next episode to be your college and pro career as kind of a... Because I'm a little bit of a basketball fan, so I kind of want to dig into that a little bit.
Sure.
So if we're kind of closing out this session, we talked about growing up fundamentalist, we talked about growing up deaf, we talked about being bullied, we talked about transitioning from the FLDS or from the AUB to the LDS Church, and your ascent on the basketball floor.
Yeah.
Anything to sort of summarize Anything else you wanted to say or anything to summarize?
Oh,
this
it's kind of like I wish I could have a lot of easy compartmentalization, but it all is kind of an exodus together. My maturation as a man playing around the world, that kind of simultaneously allowed me to fully step outside of limited religious beliefs. It all kind of is so intertwined.
Okay.
But I think this is funny. This is a good point to stop, because there's so much change and metamorphosis going on there that I'm stepping into my space, and I'm investing fully into my identity as a basketball player. And I still was not comfortable in my skin, who I was. And what my TED Talk is, what is your polygamy? And my polygamy truly was still that I believed I had to earn love. And so I think that's pretty much sums it up. I was just a kid trying to find love.
So up through your time at the U of U, even, you were searching for love?
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's the theme of your first
That's the theme, and that is going to come to a clash with Rick Majerus.
All right. So this has been the first segment of my interview with Lance Allred. It's been fabulous. Thanks for tuning in. Next episode, we're going to talk about his college and pro careers. We're going to talk about his marriage, what happened to his marriage, and we're going to talk about what happened to his faith and that sort of thing. So, Lance Allred, thank you for joining us. Tune in, go to mormonstories.org to make comments if you have any thoughts or feedback for Lance, and join us in just a few minutes for part 2. Thanks, Lance.
Mm-hmm. Right. With the Barlows, but then he eventually, and the Jeffs, he started.
So he was down there.
He was down there, but he started to notice some things he was not comfortable with at all. Delivering babies, 13, 14-year-old girls. You're like, yeah, no, I can't do this.
So they were sleeping with sort of underage girls.
Yeah, absolutely, they were
at that point.
They were marrying all these young women, and I do say this about Rulon. From everything, the journals and the diaries I've read, it's easy to cast these people in black and white spotlights. But I can say this about Rulon. In the context of polygamous leaders, he never introduced new doctrine. He always believed in adhering strictly to Joseph Smith doctrine. So he never said, I have revelation from God, and this is now what we need to do. And so in that context, I can say confidently that, in my opinion, I believe Rulon was the most ethical of polygamous leaders. It's not saying a lot, but I still do believe that as far as integrity, and obviously I do know that he, and all of us we have the ability to tell a story so many times that you begin to believe it's true, and that you buy your own propaganda.
Real quick, why is it ethical for a prophet to not reveal new revelation?
Well, the thing is, what he's doing is saying, you know what? He's kind of hamstringing himself, saying, you know what? I am just holding down the fort as a disciple of Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ. And that I believe Joseph Smith was the prophet for the latter days. And I'm just trying to hold that vision, and then God will come again and we can sustain that. Rather than simply trying to use that platform saying, the keys have been handed down for me, and the 13th article of faith now allows me to have further revelation. And you see so many prophets like the Jeffs, or even now in the mainstream church, that people use that 13th article of faith as a get out of jail free card. Kind of like, we didn't allow blacks to have the priesthood, but now the new revelation allows for it to happen. If you and I had that 13th article of faith in a marriage, and we could say, I'm sorry I hit you yesterday, honey. God told me to. But today he told me to apologize and say that was a bad thing to do. That would be labeled as a schizophrenic, emotionally abusive relationship. But when it comes to religion, somehow we accept that. And so Rulon never really played that card. It was just, I am trying to hold down the fort. I believe strongly my testimony is this. And I know sometimes, he would passively tell my father, that he had seen God. I've heard enough of my dad tell his experiences. And so I can't say Rulon was a saint by any means, but I understand why he would do the things what he did. And it's a tale of great hubris, actually, in that I know Rulon probably didn't get a lot of attention from his father. And then finally someone like Joseph Musser comes around, tells him that...
I'm sure it's awful. So we'll talk about that. But also, if any of you followed the Salt Lake City TEDx, you will know that Lance gave a really great talk called something like, "What is your polygamy?" Right?
What is your polygamy?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Really good talk, talking about blind spots and how we all have them.
True.
Even progressive and post-Mormons have blind spots.
Absolutely.
Isn't that weird?
Absolutely.
Yeah. We'll be talking about sort of that epic journey.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun. It's funny. It's always fun to have someone else narrate your life for you like that, give a summary. I'm like, wow, that's actually when I say it to myself in my head, it's all normal. But when someone else is saying it back to me, I'm like, yeah, that is kind of an interesting, weird life, isn't it? So, hey, let's do it. Let's have fun.
I think it's a fascinating life. So we're really excited to have you on Mormon Stories.
It'll be fun. I'm excited for this. I mean, because as a credit to you, I've had a lot of people with podcasts and radio interviews that want to interview me that have a very biased agenda when it comes to doing their podcast to basically, be all negative or all offensive. And I've noticed you and I've watched you. A lot of people that I trust have always highly recommended you. So this is a great opportunity. So I'm thankful again for it. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right. So let's go ahead and begin. And if it's all right, tell us a little bit about your life and what you remember about growing up as the grandson of a fundamentalist polygamous prophet, and the son of the Bruce R. McConkie.
Yeah, the Bruce R. McConkie
of fundamentalist
that would be my dad.
Mormonism. Yeah.
The reason why I'm legally deaf, 80% hearing loss, is what's called the RH factor, and this is actually pretty common in polygamous communes in that the mother's a negative, the father's a positive blood type. And nowadays at medical hospitals, they just inject the mother with something without even really asking questions, right? It's just kind of status quo. But when you're born in a polygamous commune in your grandmother's bedroom, they don't think about those kind of things. And my grandfather, Rulon, who was a naturopath but also delivered all the babies, told my parents not to even worry about the RH factor because Jesus is coming again. And he was supposed to come in 1976 or 77, but he never came.
Wait, who had said that he was coming?
Rulon.
Rulon said that.
My grandfather said.
And Rulon was assassinated when?
77.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 years before I was born. So I never knew Rulon.
Okay.
But I was raised in his, utopian dream of Pinesdale, Montana. And that is why, again, the hearing loss, what's happening is my mother's white blood cells were recognizing me as a positive blood type as a parasite. And so her body was killing me off. And when I was born, I was almost dead. Pretty much lethargic, jaundiced, very inactive. And, the polygamous commune of Pinesdale, Montana, they did all the prayer circles and all the fasting for my health. And eventually my mom said, you know what, enough is enough. Not only is he special, but he's also God's next chosen prophet. And Rulon was very charismatic, and he got to have someone tell him that he was a good person. And I do believe, again, in the context that he thought he was doing good. He really thought he was trying to fulfill Joseph Smith's prophecy for the latter days. But eventually, when you have that much power and that many people around you always yes-manning you, telling you how awesome you are, it's pretty hard not to start drinking your own Kool-Aid. And so I think eventually it just got away from him. He was happy just to accept anybody into the Allred group because that meant more money would come in. He could build more buildings and grow a larger following. And that I think he just got pretty lazy as far as who he vetted and who he allowed into his space. And that's when you see all of the very questionable people come in that really, the monsters, I guess you could say. And so it just got away from him. So it's a classic Greek tale of hubris and pride, I would say. And so that's kind of my summary of Rulon.
And so, as I remember the story, Rulon eventually moves to Salt Lake. There's some Time magazine article.
Yeah, Life article.
Life article, where he's on the cover, along with like a bunch of wives / random women / children. And that makes him kind of a bit of a celebrity.
He became the poster child for 20th century American polygamy.
Yeah,
for sure. Again, he was charismatic, he was charming, and you have to be in order to be able to get 7,000 people to give you all their money and 7 women to marry you. So obviously he had game, more game than I'll ever have. And then he starts the Montana community because to escape religious persecution. After he was arrested in the 40s, he took an oath he would never practice polygamy, but then it happened again. The police came after him. As you know, my dad went to Pocatello. The wives split up. Rulon established another colony up in Montana where there were no anti-polygamy laws. So just on the Idaho-Montana border, you know, on the side of a Montana looks like a man's face. Pinedale is right in the nose of that Montana border, the man's profile. And it was pretty much right there, backed up against the Bob Marshall wilderness, where there was nobody behind us. So if we ever needed to retreat into the canyons that went hundreds of miles deep, we could. It was like the escape contingency plan. And so that, and all that, Rulon, he was assassinated in 1977, 4 years before I was born. And when I grew up, my experience at Pinedale is that, obviously, from what I've heard from my siblings and my parents and my aunts and uncles, that the 70s fervor was really intense, how they just really did the law of consecration, and they were living it gung-ho. 1980s was still pretty intense in that you still have so much of that residual. Let's get Lance to the hospital in Hamilton, Montana, and just outside of Missoula. It's about 40 minutes south of Missoula, Montana. And there was a Johns Hopkins educated resident who specialized in RH at that hospital because he was an RH baby himself. So it was dumb luck.
What are the freaking chances of that?
Exactly. So he quickly took me, measured my blood count, and it's something called a bilirubin liver titer count. He came and told my parents, okay, at a 25, most babies have severe brain damage. At a 35 titer count, babies are dead. Your son's a 45. He's off the charts. I don't know why he's alive right now. And so he quickly rushed blood down from Missoula, Montana, and we started going through blood changes, not just transfusion, but changes, flushing out all of my bad blood that had my mom's white blood cells. And so he released me. I was in an incubator for about 2 weeks. I think 18 days actually, but he released me and he kind of chuckled and he told my parents, I would publish this in the Journal of American Medicine, but no one would believe me. And there's no logical, scientific, rational reason as to why I'm alive other than simply I chose to be. I fought. And I had someone help me. And that's the thing about life. I've had a lot of peaks and valleys and ups and downs, but I've been able to be successful because I always get back up. I choose to keep fighting, but there's always someone there that has helped me. And this doctor was the first one to do that for me. And the reason why I speak and I don't do sign, when you're born and raised in a polygamous commune, there's no amenities to learn sign language. So you just have to learn to be thrown in the fire. And I was in speech therapy till I was 15, learning to talk this way. And you know, most people that talk like that's and that's how I would talk, but we talk like that in the back of the throat because you feel that reverberation, that vibration in your skull. So you feel like you're actually making a sound. And it's kind of a catch-20, not a catch-22, it's just one of the things that's hard about being deaf or legally deaf is that you can either talk like a deaf person and everyone thinks you're an idiot, or you work really hard to sound this way and you don't always respond because you don't ever always hear anything, especially when people are talking to your back and they call you an asshole. And that either you're dumb or you're an asshole. And so, but that's my life, and that I've always kind of been on the fringes, the outliers, and I've always, as a kid, I always wanted to be normal, quote unquote. So I kept working that much harder to be normal, but that hard work always pays out, that eventually you keep always falling on the outliers there. And so growing up in Montana, there's a lot of wonderful memories actually growing up in Pinedale, Montana.
Real quick, so you're, just for those who didn't listen to the episode with Vance, your grandfather Rulon was sort of started out in an LA area in California.
Yes.
He moved to Salt Lake City, left his wife, moved to Salt Lake City, and sort of got connected with
the Short Creek, actually. The Short Creek people. He started out in Short Creek.
Right. Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is November 15th, 2016. We're here in Murray, Utah, right outside of Salt Lake City. And I'm super interested to have today's interview. Today we are interviewing Lance Allred. Lance, welcome to Mormon Stories.
Thanks for having me, John. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
All right. So Lance is cool for a number of reasons. Lance has published a book. It's called Long Shot, Lance Allred, The Adventures of a Deaf Fundamentalist Mormon Kid and His Journey to the NBA. And that really does summarize a lot of reasons why Lance is cool. You will, for those of you who follow Mormon Stories, you'll know that we interviewed Lance's father, Vance Allred, just in our last episode. We did a good 3 or 4 hours, I think, with Vance. Vance was super cool because his father, Lance's grandfather, was Rulon Allred, who started the Allred group, the fundamentalist Mormon polygamy group, also known as the Apostolic United Brethren. But we just did a fantastic several hours on what it was like to grow up as the son of Rulon Allred. Rulon got assassinated, what happened to the Allred group with some sort of sexual abuse scandals, what led to Vance leaving his fundamentalist group and joining the mainstream Mormon church, and then what led him out. If you haven't listened to our interview with Vance, you really should go back and listen to it first because it provides a lot of fascinating context for my interview with Lance. Now, Lance, in addition to if you were ever a University of Utah basketball fan or a Weber State basketball fan, or if you followed the NBA at all, you'll know that that Lance played college and NBA level basketball, professional basketball for I think 10 years. Is that right? 10 years?
Yeah.
10 years. So we're going to be talking about a lot of cool stuff today. We're going to be talking about growing up the grandson of a fundamentalist Mormon polygamist prophet. We're going to talk about Lance and his dad joining the mainstream Mormon church and sort of his high school years here in Utah. We're going to talk about his career in college basketball. We're going to talk about him losing his LDS faith. We're going to talk about what it was like to play in the NBA. I think you even played with LeBron James. Is that right?
I did. I played with LeBron.
So you were on the Cleveland Cavaliers for how long?
I was with them for about 10 months.
10 months?
Yeah.
So pretty much a year, right?
Yeah.
Other NBA teams as well?
With the Pacers for a while, and then every continent in the world except for Antarctica.
A lot of European stuff.
Yeah, and that's a grind. Most people don't realize it, but it's not fun.
Oh,